So the Postal Service is obviously facing tough times. If you've been following what's happening here in America, you know that their financials are quite strained at this time through various legislative mandates as well as declining letter and flat volume, which is the monopoly products here in the United States. While packages continue to grow exponentially, but we know probably from the discussions over the last 2 days that the package volume is in competitive products, and therefore the market has several, if not more, people that carry packages to the doorstep of most American homes. I know for a fact in my own home, I have an Amazon delivery guy, I have a UPS delivery guy, a FedEx delivery guy, and a Postal Service carrier that all come, and only 3 come to my door because I have a curbside. So, and it's not the Postal Service that comes to my door. So I know them, and I always tease that I know the face of my Amazon carrier and my UPS carrier, but I couldn't tell you who my postal carrier is because he's at the curb every day. But as products continue to grow from online shopping and other avenues, getting the product to the consumers has become the #1 priority to American businesses as the B2B environment continues to expand. In addition, the mailing industry is facing its 10-year review from the passage of the Postal Accountability Enhancement Act from 2006. So at the end of this year, we will begin a very long process where we will review the current rate structure for monopoly products. And that could have a huge impact considering catalogs, periodicals, and things that advertise through the mail are on that monopoly product side. So today's panel is going to discuss the opportunities facing the Postal Service in this B2B environment while understanding the challenges and the complexities that surround the American postal system. So the first question that we have is, Postal Vision 2020 6.0 is all about B2B and responding to the individual customer. Jim, the carriers you represent could be considered the face of the Postal Service to many consumers and individuals throughout the country. How do you think the Postal Service is poised to respond to today's demand?
So I think the Postal Service has this unmatchable network that our members are the sort of linchpin of. We visit 152 million delivery points 6 days a week. We're now doing 7-day delivery. We're doing some evening delivery, early morning delivery. And so in terms of a ubiquitous network, there's really nothing out there that quite matches it. So it's a tremendously valuable asset. And our members are really poised, I think, to really help the Postal Service succeed in this sort of 21st century Postal Service. The economies of scale and the scope that we have, and most importantly, the relationship we have with our business customers really makes the Postal Service, the letter carrier network, really invaluable. There's about 18 million Americans that run small businesses out of their homes. Our letter carriers have relationships with all of them. It's an incredibly valuable asset to the Postal Service that really we want to work with our partners in collective bargaining to really leverage the value of that asset. In the past, we've used a program called Customer Connect to really build the Postal Service's priority and package volume. But that same approach, we'd like to expand to all the products of the Postal Service. We would love to be able to build time on routes to sell small businesses about the value of direct mail, which is an incredibly successful way to build small businesses. And we'd like to be really help just everybody in the retail market, whether they're small, medium, or large, be that sort of indispensable network. And I think the Postal Service and letter carriers can play a big role in that.
And Tammy, from your role in looking at the Postal Service's readiness, but also their effectiveness and efficiency, how do you approach that same question?
It's an interesting question. I think I would agree with Jim that the Postal Service infrastructure and the employees, it's a network that really isn't going to match anywhere in the world. There's lots of opportunities. There's also lots of opportunities for missteps in that area. So I think there's a new effort at the Postal Service called Postal Crowd, which kind of emphasizes how important that customer connection is and how to make that more valuable, and how the carriers really are a part of something bigger, and how, I think that's going to pay off hopefully well with the Postal Service carriers and the clerks and everyone else that interfaces with the customer, because as we've heard over the last couple of days, that customer connection is so critical.
And as the package volume continues to grow, and you're starting to see a kind of almost a shift from people going to their mailbox for more than just maybe their bills or their monthly periodicals, as things continue to switch online, and as that volume grows, and we have this extensive network. I mean, Lori, Jim, Robert, how do you see the Postal Service being able to not only compete with other carriers, but also kind of allow for them to partner with them, right? It's almost what's the word? See, everyone knows the word but me. But so I would say, how do you see the Postal Service responding to that?
From GAO's perspective, a lot of our work is really focused at the very high level of sort of the financial challenges that the Postal Service faces. And yes, package volume is certainly growing. I think from our perspective, it's not as profitable as the mail volume that is declining. And so I think what was really critical is when the Postal Service looks at what they can do in the package arena, they really have to have a handle on how they can do it efficiently. The things that we have identified are more high level about some of the struggles that they have with becoming more efficient and costing to make sure that the prices that they're charging for some of the last mile delivery and stuff are really covering their costs. But it's not an area that we've looked at as probably as granularly as I know some of the other folks have.
Jim, Tammy, Robert.
Certainly the parcel, the shipping package services are the growth area of the United States Postal Service right now. The volume and revenue is increasing by enormous levels. However, at the end of the day, it's still a small part of the Postal Service's overall volume, about less than 3%. And as Lori indicated, the profit, shall we say, coming in is much less than the margin of the declining area. But I look at this as that underscores still the enormous strength in the system. Despite the financial mess that I had outlined yesterday at the lunchtime, it's important to keep in mind the enormous strength in our United States Postal Service system. As Jim indicated, touching more than 150 million American households and businesses on a typical day, and being a key part of this huge sector of our economy, trillions of dollars, and the Postal Service is that key cog that allows consumers to interact with businesses and advertisers to interact with consumers. So I'm optimistic that if the financials can get worked out and we have a honest adult conversation, as I outlined yesterday, about what it is of a universal service mission we expect of the Postal Service, I believe there's enormous strength in the system, and that's the foundation that's going to see this through.
I mean, I just comment that what you talked about, this co-opetition or this integration, has really been happening for years. Some of the biggest customers the Postal Service have are FedEx and UPS. Our members do last mile delivery for those companies all the time, tens of millions of packages a day. And so that integration has sort of happened. And at the same time, FedEx is one of the biggest vendors for the Postal Service, providing airlift capacity. So that integration is well down the road. I think the next step for us is that we think direct mail has a long-term strong future, and integrating the strengths of direct mail with the e-commerce boom is really the sort of next step. And I think when you have we could build a very good business model around direct mail and package and e-commerce delivery. At the same time, we're seeing that some of the rate of decline in first-class mail is very much moderated. Over the last 8 or 9 years, it went from 8% decline during the recession to 6% to 4% to 2%. Overall volume was flat last year. So it's not that we want to ignore there's additional value to first-class mail. We're promoting things like vote by mail across the country to improve democratic turnout in elections. And there are other uses of first-class mail that we're still very much would like to promote. And our challenge really now is to overcome some policy constraints and, which I'm glad John is here, he's been working really hard on it, finding a way to stabilize the Postal Service's finances and come up with sensible reforms that will allow us to innovate and grow.
You know, before we talk about the reforms, though, I just want to jump in on something that Jim is saying, is that we have to innovate and use the existing network to help the Postal Service to grow. And we have this amazing first-class delivery network that can be used in so many different components. But the Postal Service, in all of its vast glory, is a government institution, and the government is not good at innovating. I mean, that's just the truth. And the private sector is. If you look at what they've done with Amazon, where they're delivering groceries in zip codes in San Francisco at 3 o'clock in the morning, that's an innovative use of the first-class delivery network. And I really think it's incumbent upon the customers at times to come up with innovative new uses of the network, because this is a resource for you. The government created this network, and we can continue to use this network, but if we don't have your input and we don't have you driving these new and innovative products that will be used, the network will continue to crumble.
So I mean, a lot of good stuff, and we're going to hit on everything from the value of market dominant products and those sorts of things. But I kind of want to stay on the e-commerce growth, because we have Joe Murphy here from the State Department, and this expansion of e-commerce, this B2Me, is not just happening domestically. I mean, it's an international phenomenon that we are seeing. From every country, and the delivery networks we see, I think every day UPS is buying somebody to expand their network, sort of thing, internationally. So, can you give us kind of a level set of what is happening internationally and how that affects the American postal system?
Well, it's not just the growth in e-commerce that's happening internationally. It's also the decline in traditional letter mail. Letter mail volumes are declining precipitously internationally, and just as they are in most domestic markets. And posts are looking to e-commerce to make up for that lost revenue and lost volume. But those products are not. Different countries have different pricing regimes, and so in some countries they can make up the lost revenue, but they're not replacing the volume. And this is one area where international is a little different than domestic, and that the rate of growth of parcel traffic or of small packets lags well behind the rate of growth in most domestic markets internationally. And there are lots of reasons for this. Some of them have to do with customs. There's a lack of predictability in crossing boundaries with custom shipments through the mail. Private carriers can sometimes assume some of this risk or do some of the advanced work and provide the customer a better experience than posts can. Part of it relates to returns. Part of it relates to tracking. A lot of it, the UPU membership has determined, relates to a suite of products and services that are archaic, overlapping, duplicative. So there's an initiative underway at the UPU to modernize and integrate the product portfolio. We've just proposed for consideration in the UPU Congress in Istanbul in September an integrated product plan that would look long-term at a different division of postal products, instead of looking at the division as primarily being of weight, under 2 kilos being letter post, even if it's a small packet, and over 2 kilos being parcel post. The division would be based on the content, goods versus merchandise, or goods versus documents, rather. And this would, and then if it was goods, the prices would be self-declared, and there would have to be electronic advance data for customs. Now this sounds great, and it's a very exciting idea, but in the UPU nothing happens in a hurry, and there are some important decisions that will need to be made in Istanbul, and at a second decision point in 2018 beyond that, and we're looking at a slow evolution. One of the first sessions that I listened to was about turning the aircraft carrier and innovation. We're coordinating a fleet of 192 ships, not all of them aircraft carriers, but all of them encumbered with government regulations and domestic stakeholders and the politics of the UPU. The issue of terminal dues was brought up. If we can succeed in getting goods out of letter post and treat it according to self-declared rates, in the long term that would solve a lot of the controversy around terminal dues, because Post could ensure that they cover their own costs. But that's a long-term solution. In the short term, we need to improve the system of terminal dues. So in that respect, there was a very good outcome just last month in Bern, where the Postal Operations Council and the Council of Administration have recommended to the UPU Congress a terminal dues proposal that would increase the cap rate for, I'm just going to go ahead and say it and then I'll explain it, okay? The cap rate for Group 3 countries for e-format items, 13% year on year over the next Congress cycle. So that would mean that starting in 2018, the rates that China and most other rapidly emerging exporting countries pay for small packets would increase 13% a year annually for the 4 years after that. So that compounds to about a 64% price increase. That's made possible by the segregation of small packets from the mail stream that was agreed in Doha, but is only being implemented now, and a separate formula for calculating the base terminal dues rate for e-format small packet items. It's a very exciting development. It's a very positive outcome, but the final decision will be made in Istanbul, and you can expect that everyone will be jockeying to get a better deal for themselves, and we'll have to see how it comes out, but it's a very positive development, I feel.
And Robert, I know that the Postal Service files things with the Commission as far as bilateral agreements and those sorts of things. Can you explain to the group here kind of what your role is in that area, but also kind of what are some of the things that you're seeing? I know some of them are understanding things, but like what are you seeing from the versus terminal dues versus a bilateral agreement?
Sure. Bilateral agreements that the Postal Service enters into do go before the Postal Regulatory Commission, particularly on the competitive side, which terminal dues wouldn't affect necessarily. We have to ensure that they're going to be covering their cost, which we do look at. If they don't, we don't approve it. I think the larger issue, we have a very small role. Joe really does yeoman's work and is on the front line with the responsibility that the Secretary of State has working within the Universal Postal Union. We at the Postal Regulatory Commission, our role in this process is before the Secretary of State concludes these agreements, such as the UPU, we opine on aspects that might have an impact on market dominant rates and provide input there. We just conducted over the last couple of years a few studies with the help of Copenhagen Economics to do both a qualitative and a quantitative assessment of the impact of terminal dues, particularly with this growth of the small packets. And their bottom line conclusion is that the terminal due system in its current form creates enormous distortions in the competitive marketplace. And really, at the end of the day, what we should be trying to see is that Post should be charging similar prices for similar services, irrespective of country of origin or whether the shipper is a public or private operator. As Joe indicated, it's tough in the UPU. There's 192 countries. Progress at best is glacial. We may need to consider, given the strength of the U.S. Postal Service and its size and scope and the number of bilateral and multilateral agreements we have, and the rapid change that yesterday and today we've been talking about in the marketplace itself, is it time for the United States to consider not wasting any more time with this Universal Postal Union and moving out and getting bilateral and multilateral agreements that serve the needs of all American shippers and companies that ship. But again, that's an observation based on the work we've done through Copenhagen Economics. The challenge really is with Joe and the team at the State Department. And as I said, they've been doing really hard work on the front lines in the UPU.
So some of the other points that this group has touched upon is kind of, you've heard the Postal Service's financials, and I know Robert went into that at length yesterday, but also some of the challenges that they're facing due to their financial issues. So as the Postal Service continues to try to be as responsive as possible to consumer demands, it needs financial resources, whether it's through a new fleet of vehicles or maintaining the current network, the legacy system, all those kind of terms you hear in and out every day. The Postal Service seems to be kind of short on finances these days. The Postal Service has shown a net loss since the passage of the PAEA in 2006, yet in the last 2 years has had a controllable income of over $1 billion. Robert, can you explain some of this to the audience about what that really means? Like, how can they have a $5 billion net loss but then make $1 billion? And from that, why is the Postal Service making such noise come April 10th?
As I had indicated yesterday, and for those that weren't there, it really, at the bottom line, the Postal Service a few years ago was authorized by the Commission to have a temporary surcharge in place to recover the effects of the Great Recession. That temporary surcharge goes away on April 10th. That surcharge has provided about $2.1 billion on an annual basis to the Postal Service's bottom line. Once that goes away, the Postal Service is going to have some tough challenges to replace that. The increases from competitive products is not enough to offset that loss. The balance sheet is what it is, and the real world effect of that is that there's very little liquidity available to invest in package sortation equipment. Their vehicles are frankly held together by Band-Aids. Most of their products have not, and capital has not only fully depreciated, it's at the end of its life. And when you have very little working capital and liquidity to invest, it's a big challenge. So yes, there's been some positive trend lines in certain areas, particularly competitive products on their revenue and volume, but quite honestly, most of that has been driven by the temporary surcharge that's going away on April 10th.
And the Commission did, just again, ground setting here before we get into policy discussions. So the Commission did determine that the exigent surcharge should just be that, a surcharge that has a start date and an end date and not be permanently baked in. And can you kind of explain to the audience why the Commission came to that decision?
Sure. Under the law, starting in 2006, that was the last time that the nation's postal laws were changed. It was the first time since 1970 a price cap system was put in place for market dominant products, which are really the letter products, flats, periodicals. And it's a very tight price cap. And it's clear that rates at the class level cannot increase any more than the rate of inflation of the Consumer Price Index. However, there's a provision in law that does allow for extraordinary or exceptional circumstances. The Postal Service can request an increase. And they came to the Commission and did that based on the effects of the Great Recession. The Commission looked at the evidence and felt that the impact was about $4.6 billion that the Postal Service was owed. And once that was collected, those were the effects of the Great Recession. It goes away at that point. Certainly there were back and forth discussions about whether it should have been more. The original decision to increase that was a 2-to-1 decision of the Commission. I was one of the dissenters. I thought that there should have been more. The impacts of the Great Recession went on longer, but at the end of the day, that's the final decision, and so it's the law, I guess, is the short answer of it. As you had indicated, the law does say after 10 years, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday in response to a question from Dave Williams, we have the responsibility to look at how this price cap system is working and make not recommendations, but modify it or adopt an alternative system if we find that it's not meeting the objectives of the law. And that process is going to start. At the beginning, you indicated it's a long process. My focus is to ensure that it is not one. I'm all about efficiency and effectiveness of running this government operation. And we need to do it right. We need to ensure there's public input and comment. But the last place we need to be is having a study that drags on for a long time or raises more questions than it answers.
And Jim touched upon it, and Laura, I'd like you to kind of discuss a little bit. So it's not just declining revenue and volume that's a burden to the Postal Service. There were several provisions in the Postal Accountability Enhancement Act that have kind of put continued financial pressures on the Postal Service. Can the two of you kind of go over that and explain those to the audience today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I always joke that the Postal Service is the most financially strong failing company in America, in part because of the decisions that were made at the time of the passage of the PAEA. The Postal Service was given a very unique and onerous burden. It was required to pay about $5.5 billion a year for 10 years, hardwired in the law, fixed, totally inflexible, regardless of the condition of the economy, these payments were due. No other company or agency in the country pre-funds retiree health in that way. We were, at the time the bill was passed, the idea was the Postal Service would have one last rate case to build the cost of that burden into the law, into the rates. That last rate case never happened, in part because of the bad timing that the law passed just as the economy was going into recession. And we felt at the time the Postal Service should have held the rate case and then deferred the increases to pay for the retiree health payments, but that just didn't happen. So as it turns out, 89% of the Postal Service's $55 billion in losses over the last 10 years is attributable to this pre-funding burden. The other thing that the Congress did that just is sort of inexplicable when you look at it from a business point of view is they required the Postal Service to invest their entire retiree health fund in government securities. So we're giving this loan to the federal government, to Uncle Sam, very low cost loan. We're paying about 2.5% or 3% in interest to fund benefits that are growing by 5.5% or 6% a year. So that's a prescription for financial failure. No company in America would invest their pension fund that way, so conservatively and so poorly that they aren't matching their assets to their liabilities. So the combination of these decisions with the onset of the recession and then the imposition of this very strict price cap, which at the time we felt that it wasn't really necessarily the right price cap. The Consumer Price Index has very little to do with a labor-intensive universal delivery network. It has high energy and transportation costs. But Robert's right. There's going to be this review to reassess those things. I think we have a chance to straighten the ship. But these burdens placed on us by the law are really the things that I know John's grappling with now, and that we're all grappling with. And I'm very optimistic about the future of the Postal Service if we get the policy constraints sorted out in this Congress.
Yeah, so what I'd like to add to that is, again, a lot of times what we forget is the whole reason behind the pre-funding was, the Postal Service was supposed to be a self-sustaining entity, and the idea that it would pay its way and that current ratepayers would be paying for the cost of delivering that mail, which is why there was the idea that we would pre-fund. We do agree with Jim that this idea of putting in those very specific numbers for the past, many years has been a great burden on the Postal Service, and with the Great Recession and everything. I think it's important to recognize, however, that even if they hadn't had the retiree health pre-funding requirement, they still would have lost money. They still would have lost about $10 billion. And the thing you have to understand about this controllable income, which is what their income would have been if they didn't have the pre-funding or workers' comp or the Treasury debt or anything else, is that this year, in 2015, they actually made less controllable income than in 2014. And they had the exogen in 2015. Plus, they had a lot of their efficiency initiatives. Plus, they had been doing a great job since 1999, kind of holding the line on workforce. And they had been trying to reduce their workforce through attrition and things like that. At the end of 2015, we saw work hours were up because of package delivery. We saw the number of employees was spiking up again. And so this year, I think Robert might have even talked about it yesterday, it's not clear to me that this year we're even going to have any positive controllable income. So the problem, yes, the retiree pre-funding made it worse, But the thing that GAO keeps trying to tell people is that, the Postal Service is on our high-risk list because the fundamental business model that we're trying to achieve right now through the self-sustaining is no longer working. The world has changed. Again, we talked about it here today. There's so much going on out there. And I think the question is, where does this Postal Service fit in this ecosystem? And what you hear is a lot of people coming up with a lot of ideas of trying to address certain things. And even GAO has been on record as saying, we need to be able to align the costs with revenues. And we can get to some of the reasons why Postal Service has trouble with that. We need to better factor in, how the Postal Service, with the services that they can provide and what we're willing to pay for that. And I think that's what Robert talked about yesterday. But I think until and unless we can sort of have this vision of what we think this Postal Service needs to be in the future, and whether we think they should be a self-sustaining organization or whether we make them a wholly private or a wholly federal, I think we're going to keep arguing about, what are the right ways to go. In terms of legislatively, what they can do, I think what we've all seen is even areas that the Postal Service theoretically has some ability, whether it's right-sizing their network through post plan or the consolidations, boom, we get, a labor grievance or we get congressional pushback. Again, we talked about the workforce. They're trying to reduce the workforce, but now service. There's been some problems with service, so they didn't put more resources into that. They've backed off a bit on more consolidations, even though that's probably a good thing to do with excess capacity. They've backed off on the going back to 5-day delivery because it's so politically sensitive right now. The other thing that they're getting some pressure from is some more rural senators who really want to know, what's going on in my rural area, what's going on with service performance. And so Postal Service is in a position of trying to gather even more data about what's happening in the rural world. So again, getting back to my point, I think the problem is we can't quite figure out what is the best business model to support the services that we think are needed. And that's where GAO is coming from and saying that's where we kind of have to start before we do all these other things.
Actually, I want to speak to something that Lori brought up that's a very key point here. We need to figure out what the root cause of the problem is with the Postal Service. There is a structural issue that we face in Congress, and it's called the Universal Service Mandate. Everybody in Congress has their opinion of what it means, and every organization that's represented up here has a different opinion of what it means, and every mailer has a different opinion of what it means. And the problem with that is the Postal Service has a mandate to deliver mail to everybody in this country, right? They have to deliver to every rural house in America. They have to deliver to every urban mailbox in America. And the question is, does universal service mean that everybody gets the same delivery standard? Does it get delivered at the same time frames? Does it get delivered on the same frequency? What does that mean for the Postal Service? We're grappling with this decision of, do we privatize? Do we make it wholly government again? Do we keep it off budget and have it be self-sustaining? Do we move it on budget and make it an appropriated entity? Because there is this government service that is inherent in this country that we deliver the mail. And we make sure everybody gets their mail because bills and pills and packages and people's magazines come in that fashion. And we have to figure out what's sustainable and what's not sustainable. The problem that we're facing in this whole legislative reform effort, and even in the Postal Service, is when they have a mandate to deliver to every rural house, just like they have to deliver to every urban house, you have to balance that question of how do they do that, and how do they do that on ratepayer dollars, how do they be self-sustaining with these issues, and how do we also deal with all of their financial burdens. And so this situation that we're dealing with is sort of unique because the Postal Service, being a government mandated entity with a government mission, but being self-sustaining, and the business model that it's facing right now just don't seem to work. And so we're trying to figure out how do we innovate it and keep it successful.
I just make one comment. I mean, I agree with everything largely with what Lori said. I think that on the issue of the sort of cost cutting and downsizing, you really got to keep this in perspective. Postal Service has done tons of reform and tons of innovation. We took out 300,000 jobs. We weren't sitting around doing nothing in reaction to the Great Recession, my union used to have 240,000 letter carriers. Now all the routes are longer now. The productivity on city delivery has gone through the roof because now we're down to 200,000 routes and delivering to many, many more delivery points than we did before. So I think the sort of getting efficient and downsizing, a lot of work has been done. In fact, what Lori's referring to, the pushback on Congress, is it's clear it's gone too far in some places. That you can't keep a good quality of service with the level of downsizing that's gone by. That's why the Postal Service has taken a pause. And my feeling about universal services, those challenges, that's a feature, not a bug. The fact that we go to every house in the country is not just valuable to rural residents, it's valuable to urban residents who want to do business with people who live in rural America and vice versa. So this is a classic network, and the value of the network, you can't really take pieces of it and say, that's not profitable, let's cut it. The network is the network, and maintaining a high-quality network is incredibly valuable to American business. Our business customers, have the ability to literally do business with anybody in the world. I was just up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in a little town called Calumet. And I met a guy who's an eBay merchant who repairs specialized tools, and he has customers in 31 countries. And he gets about 12 shipments a day. A letter carrier goes right to his house, picks up his stuff, and that is just incredibly valuable. To him, he can live in this very remote place and do literally a global business. And that's what we got. Maintaining a good, high-quality network is possible. I know it's challenging, but if we get the public policy right, we know the pressure is not going to stop. Technology is not going to stop. The composition of the mail is going to continue to change and evolve. I think we're up to the task to handle that adaptation if we get the big, financial policies right.
Just building on that though, what we're dealing with these closures and consolidations and with the way they've restructured their network is that we have seen massive decline in service. The core product of the Postal Service is in jeopardy. The core product of the Postal Service is not first-class mail or packages, it's service, it's delivery, it's getting the mail to your home. And we have to find a way to fix that. When the Postal Service changed service standards in January of last year, we saw a massive decline in the ability to get mail in a reasonable fashion from point A to point B. And we're continuing to see problems. And the Postal Service is grappling with how do they get that service back in place. And then that's something that Congress is absolutely concerned with, because you as our constituents, as our individual voters as constituents, are suffering. We have to get the mail to you. And we have to do it in a good and timely fashion that's dependable. And so one of the core issues that we're facing is, did they close too much? Did they not close enough? We don't know. And the Postal Service has its opinions of what it did. GAO has done some phenomenal work on this. The mailing industry has done work on this. The PRC has done work on this. But everybody's got a difference of opinion. And at this point, it's really incumbent upon Congress to get an independent financial assessment done of the Postal Service that also looks at the market demand for the way its services are being offered, that looks at the structure of the network, that looks at what the financial burdens are of the Postal Service, so that we can actually make a true assessment of how to get there. And that's why we're seeing a big push in Congress to pause closures and consolidations, because we don't know if the wrong decisions were made. We need to figure out what the right decisions were.
I just wanted to jump in, just to circle back to your question. How did a $1.2 billion controllable income turn into a $5 billion loss? Because I think that's a really, really important. I talked with someone, I think it was yesterday, after your talk, we were talking about the finances of the Postal Service and the headlines that all of us read in America and actually around the world about how the Postal Service is losing, multiple billions of dollars every year. And I think the thing that the person that I spoke with yesterday was not as aware as we all are sitting on the dais here, and as most people probably are in the room, is that retiree health benefit pre-funding obligation. It's huge. And it's massive, and the Postal Service, before it opens its doors every year, has a $5 billion bill sitting on its doorstep. So I think that that in and of itself, as big as it is, kind of blurs how all of us see the situation, the financial situation, and if there's, you know, if there's any clarity that can be, you know, once that's taken off. I know Jim was talking about options, and I know John's been working on this really hard for a long time on how to solve this problem. But it does change net incomes into net losses, and it would in almost any company in America or the world. So.
But you know, just building on that though, that is a burden that the Postal Service faces regardless of the pre-funding. It is something that it has not only collectively bargained, but it is something that it is obligated to do because it is temporary. It is partially a government, not temporarily, but partially a government entity. You know, the government pays for retiree benefits. If you work your entire career at the Postal Service and you retire, that is something you're entitled to. The question is, how do we make that burden affordable for the Postal Service? And how do we control costs so that the mailer doesn't get, you know, bombarded and screwed over, for lack of a better term?
All right, let me answer that question. How do you do it? Look in your bill. Because the answer is really just to adopt private sector best practice in the U.S. You know, that's funny coming from a union guy. But if we could just be allowed to, you know, people are constantly telling the Postal Service, be more like a business. But the way Congress has set up these burdens, we're not allowed to act like a business. No private sector company would put a $50 billion fund into low-yielding treasury securities for a 90-year liability. That's insane. But we do that every day. And no company would invest their, you know, turn long-term liabilities into short-term liabilities. So if we, in the private sector, every company that provides retiree health, which virtually every Fortune 1000 company does, when you hit age 65, you have to enroll in the Medicare program that both sides have paid taxes for your entire career. That's a condition of continued coverage under the company health plan. If we did that, we would have a very tiny unfunded liability. We'd have the best funded retiree health plan. Well, we already do. At 50%, we have the better funded retiree health plan than any company in the country. And if we did what John has proposed in Senator Carper's bill, we'd be virtually fully funded for retiree health. So it sounds very complex, like these are impossible problems to solve. It's not impossible.
I should say, you know, I'm talking from a broad perspective. If anybody wants to talk about what Senator Carper has proposed individually, if we don't have time to get into it here, I'm happy to spend some time talking about that after this. But the reality is, you know, we have to find a way to help the Postal Service act as much like a business as possible. Now, does that mean it's still going to have some oversight and we're still going to have congressional involvement? Yes. This is something that is in the Constitution. You know, that means Congress is going to be involved in it. And we have to protect the services for the people of this country because Postal Service is basically guaranteed to every person in this country. We just have to figure out how to do it right.
And if I could comment, again, I think from where we would sit as sort of the, you know, an unbiased party here, obviously integrating with Medicare and investing funds in a different way could provide some financial relief. But again, I guess what we would say is it's a slippery slope because once you start to change the parameters of this business structure, you know, federal employees are not required to take up Medicare. So if we say, okay, postal employees are required to take up Medicare, what does that mean for them? What are the implications? What is that ticket for the taxpayer? We've heard about a bunch of different numbers. At one point, Postal was saying that might save $53 billion for them. Another point, recently they said it might save $43 billion. Really, OPM is the one that would have to determine what it would be for a hit for the taxpayer. But again, what we continue to argue is, you know, we really need to have this higher level perspective of what is the business model and what is the structure we think to support the Postal Service before we start saying, okay, ratepayers, can you keep paying the exigent, or taxpayers, we're going to have you take, you know, some of this, the $54 billion unfunded liability, because any action we take will have a repercussion and will have an implication. And we just want to make sure that when we make these actions, we're doing it on good data and there's a plan. And I look to my friends in Congress here that, you know, they're my bosses. I know they're smart and they're going to do the right thing, right? I have to say that because they're my bosses. But that's what, you know, we keep starting. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you need to align your costs with revenues the best way you can. We have talked about better accounting in the statutory framework for the financial position of the Postal Service, because labor, as we all know, is 80% of their costs. And we also have talked about restructuring the benefits appropriately, but they all have to work together.
And that's the key ticket here, right? We're trying to figure out how do we integrate, how do we change the business model, how do we conserve costs. But the fact of the matter is, while we're having this higher level conversation, which I absolutely am arguing is part of our bill by what we're doing with some of the assessments and that we're going through, we also have to put, and I don't like using this term, a Band-Aid on it, so that the Postal Service can continue to operate. We can't just say, pause, Postal Service isn't gonna deliver mail for 2 years, and we're gonna restructure this and figure it out. We have to continue to function, and we have to continue to function well.
Is that the Metro Rail solution?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have to continue to function, and we have to continue to function well, and, that's gonna mean hard choices up front.
But I just want to comment, from Lori's point of view, I totally understand the GAO's approach to this. It's totally appropriate. I mean, sometimes people say to us when we promote this Medicare integration solution, well, aren't you just putting that burden on American taxpayers? And to which I always reply, we ain't Canadians. The letter carriers have been paying these taxes. The Postal Service has put, tens of billions of dollars into the Medicare program. So it's not, if there are problems in the Medicare program, go at it, Congress, and fix it, and we'll live with whatever comes out of that process. But the fact is, we've been paying into the system, and so it's not like we're some third party. We're taxpayers too.
I just want to ask a question. How many in here are private businesses? Please raise your hand. Every single one of you has the right to tell your employees you're going to offer retiree health if they can participate in Medicare. Every single one of you. The Postal Service, because it is a government hybrid and participates in government programs, does not. The difference between the Postal Service and the regular federal government and federal employees is that also in Title 39, they are mandated to offer comparative comparative pay and benefits to the private sector. But they can't do it because they have to participate in federal pension and they have to participate in federal health care. So what we're trying to do is create that parity between the private sector and the Postal Service so they can continue to function. This in no way would create, in my opinion, a precedent for general federal employees, because the difference is the Postal Service is an off-budget entity. It's got liabilities that it has to assume through ratepayer dollars, through its business income. The federal government is fully funded by taxpayers. If we're going to transition federal employees into Medicare, all we're doing is moving the bucket from FEHBP to the bucket in Medicare. That doesn't solve any problems for the federal government. What this does is actually create a situation for the Postal Service that makes them sustainable. And so what we're trying to do is actually allow for, parity in pay and benefits.
So, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but so the Postal Service hasn't been paying anything into the retiree, its pre-funding payment since what, 2009, 10? And it was like, and they
missed 28 billion.
Yeah, and so where does this, we're not paying it. No one's coming up to lock up anybody for not making a payment, right? There's no debt collectors knocking on the Postal Service headquarter doors. So where does this money sit, or lack of money sit?
It still gets expensed, so that's what, in the big, broad headlines you see in the paper, the Postal Service lost $5 billion. It doesn't matter that he didn't pay it. It was expense. It's considered an expense. And it's added on their balance sheet as a liability.
So it's still sitting there.
It's still sitting there.
It's sitting there, big, fat, and
So
ugly, just waiting.
We gotta solve it, yep.
But Jessica, just to answer your question, nobody's coming to collect it. They are. And you have to think about it in terms of the pre-funding didn't have a trigger to say, if you don't pay your pre-funding, you're gonna go to jail, or whatever's going to happen. What they tried to do at one point was not pay their pension payment. And what OPM and OMB came back with, and Treasury came back with, was, well, then your people aren't getting their pensions. So what I bet will happen, and I'm gambling on this, so this is, me talking with the roll of the dice, is that once we transition in this next year, where they are having to get their premiums come out of the Retiree Health Benefit Fund, if they do not make their amortized payments, and they do not make their normal cost payments, then that fund will get turned off by Treasury. which means there will be no health care for retirees. So,
And we'll meet you in court.
exactly, I'm just saying, but that's the same situation that will happen with the Postal Service, is, you know, that's why they made their pension payment, because they had that obligation to make sure their pensions were paid to their employees, and because the unions would take them to court, and they would lose. So the same thing is going to happen, I would argue the same thing will likely happen with the healthcare when things flip. So if we don't make this sustainable now, we're gonna see a collapse later.
So I definitely want to get into some of the legislative proposals that are on the table now, because I mean we've kind of hinted upon it. But before we get into that, because I think we all have our opinions on what would work and what wouldn't work. You know, so most of the folks on this are all government employees except me, right? I represent a bunch of commercial mailers who have a different stake in this game, and so I think that's the one voice outside of the actual Postal Service being on this that's kind of missing in this conversation. And one of the things that I would really want to stress is the uncertainty, right? I think we have created quite an uncertain picture for the Postal Service's future. So what does that mean to commercial mailers? Kind of the lifeblood of the Postal Service, the main users of the products and services that the Postal Service offers. We're facing service issues. We're facing a price review where our certainty or moving forward is at stake. We are looking at having to pre-fund things that no other company has to do, but it has to come out of ratepayers' pockets, which is the average American business, which is then going through and trying to grow and give returns, whether it's to the stock market or to owners and that sort of thing. So, 80%, 90% of the Postal Service's revenue is commercial business. And so what does this picture paint to the average person looking to create a mailing year over year? Or that CEO in some bank who doesn't give a crap what's happening to the Postal Service, but all of a sudden they're reading the headlines because it's in the Wall Street Journal, and they're going, oh God, we got to get out of the mail. That thing's falling apart. Right? So what picture are we painting to people who aren't sitting on the stage? Because, we live, eat, and breathe this stuff. I probably talk to most people that are sitting on the stage at least once a week. So it's one of those where, we're living it, but what kind of message and communication are we giving to the outside world or to that CEO who's quite removed from this conversation as we move forward? So even though these are strict policy decisions that Congress needs to make, there are huge, as Lori said, huge consequences and business implications across the world. It's not just domestically. You have Joe sitting on the stage talking about foreign posts and bilaterals and the UPU and potentially looking to leave it. And there are real world implications to these conversations that we're having today to keep mail affordable. So with that, kind of diatribe that I just went off on, I would like John and Jim and Joe and everyone to kind of touch upon some of the legislative proposals that are out there, so you kind of understand what's happening in the background while the Postal Service continues to deliver mail every day and pay its customer or pay its employees and collect revenue from business customers and those sorts of things. The background conversations that's happening legislatively. But first, I'll look to Joe to add comments.
Yeah, thanks. Much of this conversation is not directly touching upon the responsibilities of the State Department, which are very specific to the framework for international mail exchange. But it's interesting what John was talking about, the decline in service in rural areas, but across the board, really, I think, for a lot of customers. This plays itself out even in the context of the UPU, where there's been a lot of press coverage about the loss the Postal Service sustains on inbound delivery of international mail. A not inconsequential share of that loss is attributable to failing to meet the quality of service standards that are benchmarked at the UPU. So if the USPS was in a position to meet those quality of service standards, to meet the UPU benchmarks, the remuneration would be better. As far as leaving the UPU is concerned, let me say that the U.S. is not considering leaving the UPU. I understand Chairman Taub, mentioned that it might be time to think about it. I don't believe that the 142 years that the United States has invested in this institution was wasted time. Okay, all of the bilateral agreements that, that USPS has entered into, and I think it's around 24, are predicated on the UPU acts. They don't replace them, they supplement them. In the absence of the UPU acts and in the absence of their application to the United States, we would have to reinvent a system of international mail exchange that has been in the making for almost a century and a half. Okay? We can think about it, but we're not planning to leave the UPU.
Actually, just talking about that though, it's not just the principle of the UPU and bringing in revenue. If we could get service fixed, revenue itself would increase. Whether it's significant or not, people will feel more comfortable using the postal service and will go back to shipping more, or will go back to mailing more. Having reliable service is important for newspapers. It's important for advertisers. Target talks to us about this. Walmart talks to us about this. People find that it is important to have that reliable service component because it brings in revenue for them. And so if they're getting reliable revenue, they're going to be more willing to spend money at the Postal Service to get that revenue in. And I mean, we have to fix the service, if for nothing else, but to stabilize our broad economy in this country. The Postal Service is a 1.7 linchpin in a $1.7 trillion mailing industry. That is on par with the oil and gas and the airline industry in this country. We have to stabilize this. So with that, I'll jump back to you, Jessica. Sorry.
It's okay. So looking, and I just got the 5-minute warning. So I guess quick, good conversations go quickly. So I guess, kind of the one thing I just want us to touch upon in conclusion, right? Because I mean, we didn't really get into the actual legislative, but we've hinted upon it. So we kind of know what's at stake and what needs to be discussed at a legislative level. So I guess my closing comment would be that, the Postal Service has always been a B2Me organization, right? It seems that the rest of the economy seems to be catching up with it, right? It delivers 6 days a week, all the way throughout the country. It is, the linchpin to a lot of business commerce, and domestically and internationally. And as we move forward, and the rest of the world seems to be catching up with this, give it to me now, my way, right now, kind of the Burger King slogan, my way, right away, or however it goes. The Postal Service will need to continue to meet those demands. But, and the big but here is, how fast they do it, and what are we willing to pay for as not only a nation, but as businesses. And as alternatives continue to grow, electronic communication, other carriers, that sort of thing, where do you draw that line with the affordability, the predictability of prices, but also the speed at which it gets delivered and how often it's delivered, right? It's not just 6 days a week, 4 days a week in some, what are we willing to live with and what are we willing to pay for? And I think that needs to be the base of the conversation moving forward from a policy standpoint, because, my grandmother has a different opinion than I do. I barely get any mail. My business is packages, right? Because I'm ordering things online, sort of thing, and I pay everything online. So my opinion and probably my children's opinion are going to be significantly different than my grandmother's opinion. But we all have a stake in this, and we all have an opinion. So with that, as you kind of think of your closing comments, think about what the Postal Service has to meet in order to stay relevant, for people to want to use the product, in order to keep the infrastructure. I mean, I think it gets downhill very quickly. So that's just the way I feel. Postal Service has always been B2Me. How do you keep it that way and make it sustainable?
We're going down the...
Sure.
Well, I would reiterate what I said before, which is that, we would argue that it's got to be a multifaceted, comprehensive approach. It's not just about revenue generation. I think GAO still believes that there are efficiencies that need to be gained. I think part of the problem is because it's not being done in a comprehensive, kind of a holistic way, we might be having some adverse effects from that, like service delivery problems, or not maybe making good decisions about where we need to reduce capacity. So I guess we would say it's a multifaceted problem, so it's got to be a multifaceted, comprehensive approach that gets at aligning costs with revenues and really looking at the cost structure to see what we think is appropriate to pay.
International is a relatively small part of the Postal Service's overall business, and the only part that I'm concerned with. But in that small slice, I think there are two things that are really key. In the medium term, the most important thing is to support the realignment of the portfolio of physical services, its modernization and integration that UPU members have undertaken initially through this integrated product plan. We need to try to accelerate that, to build on it, and to get it widely adopted. And in the interim, we need to do a better job on prices for terminal dues, and especially for terminal dues for small packets from rapidly emerging countries, in particular China. We're very fortunate there are two proposals on the table that will be considered in Istanbul that go a long way toward addressing the most serious challenges in the international postal network today.
So I guess my perspective on this is a little different than everybody's because of the congressional nature of my job and the politics that I have to play in trying to get postal reform moved through not only the United States Senate, but the Congress and to the President's desk. You know, this is something you hear about all the time, the special interests that compete in legislation and how we balance that. So I would just like to tick off some of what we're trying to balance in the bill and be fair is we're trying to make sure that costs are contained for businesses, that the Postal Service has enough revenue to continue to be sustainable, that the benefits that have been negotiated are allowed to the unions the way that they're supposed to be provided. We're also concerned about rural mail and about how we get mail delivered to rural communities, but we're also concerned about this universal service mandate and how fast are things being delivered and should it be delivered, what's the market demand for products. So this teeter-totter that we're balancing has so many competing interests in it, and one member of Congress, in the Senate at least, can really be a strong voice on this. And so my boss, who's been a huge advocate for the Postal Service his entire career, wants to get this done and wants to get postal reform done and wants to get their debts paid off so that they can be a long-term sustainable organization for businesses. And we are absolutely on board with considering anything that can make that happen. But you know, we also have to find a way to balance a picture of how do we have a good score, and we have to deal with members who don't care about the Postal Service and about balancing that because they don't want to see us pass a bill that is a bigger debt to the taxpayer. But yet, the way some of these scoring procedures work, it's just not right and it's not fair. And so what you have to realize is that whatever we pass in Congress, it's not ever going to be a totally comprehensive package because it just can't be with the nature of our current political structure. There are too many competing interests. But what we can do is come up with a stabilization package and continue to work on this issue long term to develop another piece of legislation that could really advance the ball forward. Congress and the government works in small and medium steps. And unfortunately, what we're working on right now has to be a rather large step because it has to get a business stabilized. This is not a political Republican-Democrat issue. This is a union, this is a business, this is a urban, this is a rural issue. You know, yes, there are political philosophies that are competing in this about how we should streamline this or how we should close this or how we should keep this open. But at the core function we are dealing with is how do we provide fast and accurate service and what is the demand for that fast and accurate service? And I would argue what Senator Carper has introduced asks that question and tries to get some of those answers so that while we're working on this Band-Aid to get them through hopefully the next 10 years, we can get a more sustainable stitch put in place so that this can heal and so that the Postal Service can actually continue to move forward without a limp.
First of all, I wanted to thank John Callan for inviting me to take part, and I really appreciate the chance to be here with all of you. Let me just pick up on something that Jessica said about, you know, we've always been sort of B to me, and that's certainly how my organization has approached this. You know, we always tell our members, our customers are not just the 150 million households and businesses we deliver to. There's this other set of customers that are really important. It's the business mailing community that generates 95% of the mail, and the people who pay for the postage, those are our customers. And so we know that ultimately job security for our members depends on a healthy mailing industry, and that's how we've tried to, address. John is absolutely right. The Postal Service is tremendously popular in the country. It's got an 83% approval rating. I saw Pew did a poll a couple months ago, and the only one we we finished behind Pope Francis. So that was a tough blow to take. But as a result, it shouldn't be a partisan issue, but it is. John has absolutely identified the fissures, and our approach to this is to try to work with the business community. We put together a business labor coalition that's really working hard to find solutions and engaging John's committee. Despite this is just so frustrating, given the way Congress is not particularly functioning very well right now, I'm very convinced that we can get this done.
These are really big problems that we've been talking about up here. But I also think one of the things that we've heard over the last day and a half here is about some of the incredible advancements in technology and some of the innovation that is available in the 21st century. I think the Postal Service is really able, with a little bit of controllable income that is starting to generate, to actually look into some of these innovative areas and leverage technology. Technology can solve some of, not necessarily the political problems, but some of the service problems in a much less expensive way than maybe we would have solved them 5 or 10 years ago. So I think if the Postal Service can, as some of the political issues and some of the big financial pressures are being looked at in other forms and maybe taking a little bit longer to solve, but looking at how technology can address some of the service issues and being the best service company that it can be, being customer-centric, and focusing on that as it moves into hopefully some solutions in other areas. So I would encourage looking at technology as an opportunity.
I think, as I had outlined yesterday, for me, in a perfect world, we would go to the fundamentals and look at the basics of what is it that we want this nation's postal administration to do from a universal service obligation perspective, understand what that cost is, and then from there you would flow and structure it. The house is on fire financially, and so the most important thing is to stabilize that financial situation and then get to those fundamentals. That being said, given my 15 years on Capitol Hill and the nearly 12 years it took to get the 2006 law enacted, maybe more a reflection of my incompetency as a staffer to do that, John is right on. The question is not a perfect world, but how do you get 51 or 60 votes in the Senate, 218 in the House, and a presidential signature? And Senator Carper and John and the staff level have been doing yeoman's work to get that done. And inherent in that larger bill are those fundamentals of stabilizing it financially and including a study and work that the commission would have to undertake on universal service. So those things I would see as the way forward. I would also want to just add a PS on Joe's remarks on the Universal Postal Union. I want to assure him and not create a international incident by suggesting that the United States is about ready to move out of the UPU. That certainly is not going to happen anytime soon, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the State Department or would assume to do so. But I would say from the perspective of looking at the issue, as Joe said, the international revenue and volume is such a small part of the U.S. Postal Service's bottom line. It's almost becomes a rounding error. But what this issue has is immense implications for the competitive marketplace of the American mailing consumer and American businesses. And that's where my frustration is that we had a hearing last year that I testified in the House on this. It was deja vu all over again. We were speaking the same issues of a similar hearing 15 years ago. The UPU is an old organization. It has its roots in Postmaster General Montgomery Blair, who, for those who don't know, was Abraham Lincoln's first Postmaster General. I'd suggest, given where we are in 2016, maybe it is time to think about, which some might suggest as a cartel of postal administrations, whether it's time, given the rapidly changing marketplace, we look at that. But that's just my own observation from my foxhole, and I certainly don't want to create any suggestion that the U.S. is about ready to move out on that.
May I say something, Jessica? Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but excellent, Jessica. Thank you so much. Boy, you did a wonderful job with this. And again, thank you to Postcom under Gene's era and yours, because you guys have been enormously supportive of this effort. And I want to thank all the panel members, because we are truly honored, folks, to have all these people here who are representatives of our government, which is still a great government in a great country. And thanks to you people who help us with all of your aspects of that, including the unions. And there are other unions represented here too, like APW, and so we appreciate that, because we are all stakeholders in this, clearly. And as someone said, you know, this is the one business that can claim every single American as a customer. Talk about B2Me. We are all customers of the United States Postal Service. So I just want to close, other than this thank you to everybody, and to thank you all, by asking John, what can we do? Or any of you, what can we do? This conundrum is just so frustrating. And I also say thank you for being here. We did invite Ranking Member Carper, who as chairman 2 years ago came and was with us. His support is wonderful. I think he's got enormous respect from the industry, because he seems to be the one guy in Congress who really is trying to solve this problem, and is also dares to use the word compromise and collaborate. Remarkable public servant in that regard. So thank you for him, and he couldn't be here. Thank you for representing him. But what can we do as a group or as individuals? Is there anything we can do other than be frustrated by this?
Well, first, let me thank you for having me, because doing these types of platforms are extremely important, because it gives us an opportunity to explain to you why we care and what we care about, and also to hear from you so that we know what we need to be working on. You know, we need your support, and we need you to be working with us and collaborating with us and talking to your members of Congress about getting involved and getting on board with this. You know, Senator Carper has said all along, we introduced the iPost bill earlier this year because we needed to get that conversation started, and we needed to get it done as quickly as possible. We are very concerned that we have to get something done this Congress. We've been working on postal reform for the better part, well, I mean, since 2008, I've been involved in postal reform conversations. So, I mean, we are coming upon a decade for this as well, so we're right on target with Robert. And so, you know, it's extremely important that you get involved and you work with us. You know, we're not saying the bill's perfect. We're open to working to make changes. But what we're not open to doing is letting the Postal Service fail. We have to fix this. And that's going to take your support.